Welcome back to another edition of the Hart2Heart Podcast, and my guest today is Dr. Jose Antonio. You may know him from all of his research on creatine or protein. He's a beast in the industry, so I'm really happy to chat with you today. So, Dr. Jose, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Hart. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm sure we have a lot of fun things to talk about.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of fun things to talk about. You know, creatine's been, I think, more popular than ever in the last few months. It's getting a lot of, traction on brain health. And, for people who don't know you, you've done a ton of research on creatine. And so maybe we'll just start there, for people who don't know you. Can you just give the audience a little bit of a brief background?
Yeah, sure. I got my PhD in the 1990s oddly enough, in cell biology and anatomy. A lot of people, I sort of took the traditional sort of biology route. And I focused my PhD on skeletal muscle fiber hyperplasia. I'm not sure your audience is into muscle fiber hyperplasia, but that was my PhD. And I did a postdoc in endocrinology metabolism and I completed that in 1996. And then after that, my interest had always been in sports nutrition. Now, the question people ask me is, why didn't you do a dissertation in sports nutrition? And I'm going to kill you a little bit with a history lesson. I know my students hate history, but I'm telling you, you got to know history to figure out why things are the way they are. So back in the 1990s, sports nutrition was not, let's just say, it wasn't a legitimate field of inquiry according to the intelligentsia of the time. And I use that word. That's not a compliment, by the way. So they thought, who studies this protein, creatine, it's all a waste. I remember picking up my first sports nutrition textbook in the 1980s. I'm like, oh, so in conclusion, nothing works except maybe caffeine. And I'm thinking, okay, there's just something wrong here. And so I pursued muscle physiology because that's sort of my second academic love. I always loved muscle physiology. However, I knew at the end of the day, it doesn't really pay the bills. I mean, there's a few people who love talking about skeletal muscle, but it's not something you go to a bar and talk to the guy next to you and say, hey, you want to know about muscle fiber hyperplasia? And they're like, I don't think so. But everyone loves sports nutrition. So I graduated, did a postdoc, and I thought, you know what? Now I can do the fun stuff. And I tell students all the time, when you get your PhD, or even if you want to be a medical doctor, once you get your degree, you can do the fun stuff afterwards, but get the degree first. So after I did my postdoc, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start pursuing sports nutrition. Now, still, what's interesting is, we're still in the 1990s, and nobody wanted to touch sports nutrition, particularly sports supplements. I mean, I don't know if you go to the American College of Sports Medicine meeting, that was my sort of bread and butter conference to go to as a grad student. The zeitgeist of the time was that supplements are a waste of time. Anyone who thinks they want to do research in it, you're wasting your time. And I thought to myself, either I'm really stupid or they're really wrong. And I know I'm not stupid. So
it turns out they were really wrong.
They were really wrong. So the year 2000, myself and one of my good friends, Dr. Jeff Stout, he's at University of Central Florida, we gave a seminar at ACSM. This was, and I don't know the exact year, it was either 1999, 2000, or 2001. And it was the first true seminar there on sports supplements. And I thought, wow, we were actually both shocked that they accepted our talk. I'm like, they don't like supplements. Oh, we'll give a talk. Well, a funny thing happened after our talk. And I personally thought it was probably the most boring talk I ever gave. And Dr. Stout agreed. He's like, man, this shit's boring. It's not like we're talking about much. We talked about creatine, vitamin C, caffeine. I mean, just basic stuff. But the way the audience responded was priceless. And let me explain. I'd say half the audience absolutely hated us. Not disliked us, hated us. In fact, I recall a professor from South Dakota State, I think it was South Dakota State, he stood up, he got up to the microphone and he said, I cannot believe ACSM allowed you guys to speak. This is such total bullshit. None of this stuff works. And I was like, whoa, these people are really pissed.
What was the physique of this guy, just out of curiosity?
Well, there's even a funnier story to that during this conference. He was tall and let's just say his body mass index was probably higher than it should be, right? So we're giving this talk And it's like, wow, they're attacking us. And these people, they do not like supplements until a bodybuilder stood up and said, you know what? Let these guys answer the questions. You guys are just harassing them. You ask the question, but you don't want them to answer it. And then it became clear there was two groups of people. One group loved us. They're like, wow, it's about time someone talked about supplements. The other group hated us. Now, it's funny you brought up the question of what this person looked like. So this bodybuilder stands up and he was defending us, saying, hey, look, we've never had a talk like this in ACSM, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you guys here, all you're doing is harassing them. And then he points to a scientist. He literally points to him and says, I can tell you've never taken creatine. And I was like, holy shit. Because he was making fun of his very
good on him for doing that.
Yeah, so his BMI was like 19 or something. So you could visualize the scientist with a body mass index of 19. And so they both go up to the middle of the aisle where the microphone is, and they are nose to nose. And I'm like, I look at Dr. Sun, I'm like, holy shit, they're going to have a fight. But it'll be 2 hits. Bodybuilder's going to hit the scientist, and the scientist is going to hit the floor. 2 hits, and it's over. And I was thinking, oh, God, there can't be a fight here. This would just look really bad. And in the back of the room, Dr. Rick Ryder, he's at Texas A&M now, he just stands up and yells. He's like, everybody just shut up. Let these guys, if you're going to ask questions, ask them respectfully and let them answer the question. And that kind of brought the room temperature down. But it was almost coming to like fisticuffs in a conference hall at a science conference. So that's the zeitgeist of the time. People are very anti-supplement. And this is, again, roughly the year 2000. Now, think about this. When did you graduate medical school, by the way?
So I graduated in 2010.
Okay, so
that for a second.
Yes, so yeah, you wouldn't have experienced this. So think about this. Prior to the year 2000.
Well, I think it's still going on now in some ways. I mean, it's gotten much better, but I'll let you continue your story. But I mean, I just saw actually like 2 prominent female physicians put out a article, I think like today, saying the title was something like, patients are taking too many supplements. It's in the New York Times. I'm sure you're going to see it later on today, but I don't want to sidetrack your story, but I do feel like it's certainly still going on today. And there's a lot of anti-supplement people who are very, very prominent. And let's say one of them even got the Order of Canada recently. So it's pretty wild what's going on. But continue, because I'm sure it was way, way worse, back when you were coming up.
Yeah, so think about this. Before the year 2000, and I can only speak to universities in the United States. Before the year 2000, you were lucky to find a college course on sports nutrition. It was rare. Now, from the year 2000 to now, 2025, every major university, even small universities, have a sports nutrition college course. In fact, my university, there's 2 of them. I mean, one from the nutrition department, one from exercise science. I'm like, wow, I think we have too many courses now. But think about that. Think of the growth of sports nutrition as an academic field of study just in a decade and a half. And I think part of it is because of the ISSN, the International Society of Sports Nutrition. People love sports nutrition as a field of study. Why? Because it's fun. And the people who do it, everyone who does research in sports nutrition, they all train. They all love talking about food. They all love talking about supplements. Why? Because they all have, what's interesting about this science cohort coming out, they all have a personal goal, whether they want to be a bodybuilder or a cyclist or a runner. And so when you get together in this conference, people are just saying, well, you know what I do? If I want to cycle better or cycle faster, I do this. Or if I want to get my PR in a 5K, or if I want to, break a record and doing a bench press, a personal record. So we have this commonality, which I don't think really existed before the year 2000. However, you are absolutely correct that this anti-supplement mindset still exists. And I know this will piss off a lot of your audience, but it tends to exist within two professions, dietetics and medicine. For whatever strange reason, those are the 2 professions. And I think this is why. There are so many dietitians and so many physicians that, of course, there's going to be some that have no idea what they're talking about, but they love blabbing on social media. Whereas if you think about this, Mike, the number of sports scientists that actually do research in sports nutrition in the United States, I would say 100, if you're lucky. So think about, there's 100 of us doing research, but there's like tens of thousands of physicians and dietitians who may have never read a sports nutrition original investigation or textbook, and their entire mindset has been sort of massaged by, looking at it clinically. Whereas, as you know, Mike, people who train, and I tell this all the time to clinical audience, if you're exercise trained, you're nothing like a sedentary person. You can't even compare the two. So that's why often mistakes are made in terms of what supplements someone should take. And, I just the first thing I ask is, I don't ask what supplements they take. I ask, do you train? And what's your goal? If you don't train, then I'm like, it doesn't matter what you're taking because you're not even exercising. So that's sort of the short story of how we got to where we are today.
Yeah. And I will say too, if you want to be ostracized in a doctor's lounge, walk in with a big set of arms and a protein shake and talk about Joe Rogan. Do those three things, and I guarantee every single person in there will hate you right away, and you will fail your rotation no matter what you do. And then
because
if you
that
want
is
to be
hypertoxic masculinity.
Yeah. And add that in there. And then if you want to, be recognized as someone who's, up and coming in medicine or something like that, go in with, a skinny fat physique, eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and talk about, anti-supplement podcasts, and you'll be good to go on how much you hate RFK Jr. And that way, you'll be good to go. Trust me, it's brutal. I totally get it. And before we, go on to that a little bit further, because we could just have a whole podcast on that easily, I'm sure. I do want to ask you a few questions because, unlike some of the people that we were just discussing, you are a supplement expert. And, I don't know if you'll say this, but you're probably, the most well-researched person on creatine, maybe in the world, or on protein, or right up there anyway. And so, I wouldn't mind asking you a couple questions about that. So in terms of protein, is there an upper limit as to how much protein we can eat per day if we're trying to maximize performance and hypertrophy?
I think the quick answer to that is nobody knows. However, I think usually that is framed as, is there an upper limit per meal? And you and I know the 20 to 40 gram range has been thrown around for the last 2 or 3 decades. Again, there's no evidence to support that. And then there was that later work from the group up in the Netherlands, Trommelin's group, looking at a 100 gram dose of protein, showing that a single 100 gram dose promotes muscle protein synthesis literally all day. I mean, for like 12 hours or so. So we don't know what the upper limit is per meal, which of course translates into we don't know what the upper limit is for the entire day. Now, I think I'm one of the few scientists that have looked at just crazy high intakes of protein just to see what it does. And we're talking, you had alluded earlier to the 4.4 grams per kilo. Sort of a funny story behind that. The only reason we did that is I had a bodybuilder in one of my classes, and he'd always come in with he'd eat. He always eats in class. I'm like, damn, you're always eating. He has that jug of water. He's always drinking. And I asked him, how much do you eat a day? Just out of curiosity. And so he told me, and bodybuilders are great with diet. They know exactly what they eat. In fact, they're the only group that actually knows what they eat. Everyone else lies about what they eat. But anyways, he told me what he ate. And I'm like, oh, wow, you're like at 3 grams per kilo. That's pretty high. And so I decided, you know what? I'm just going to do a quick and dirty study. Just get a bunch of people who train and say, hey, I'm going to give you free protein powder for 8 weeks. Just eat as much as you can. And I want you to hit 4.4 grams per kilo. So we did that. Voila, nothing happened. And of course, the fact that nothing happened really kind of confused a lot of people because it's like, wait a minute, they're eating 600, 800 more calories a day of just protein powder and nothing happens. I'm like, yeah, I mean, nothing happened. And it might be because protein is not, you're not going to get fat eating a lot of protein. And I think I wanted to dispel that one myth because that's all over the internet. Eat too much protein, too many calories, you get fat. I'm like, no, I mean, theoretically, maybe, but I don't see it happening. However,
so
the problem with
calories from protein is not going to increase body fat. It's from your research anyway.
I always tell people if aliens came down here and they treated us like cattle and they want to fatten us up, for the slaughter to eat us, I'm like, they're not feeding us whey protein. They're giving us donuts. I mean, they're giving us carbs, fat to fatten us up. So if your goal is to get fat, eating a lot of protein isn't the way to do it. But But the interesting thing after that study was we had a lot of people quit. They dropped out, like 20 and 25% of people dropped out because they said they couldn't they literally could not handle that much protein. And this was one of the more interesting observations. They said they hated eating after a while. They're like, you know what? I'm not even hungry. The pleasure of eating disappeared. And so they said, you know what? I just can't do this. So the follow-up study was we lowered the dose to 3.4 grams per kilo, that's substantially less than 4.4. And we put them all on sort of this generic bodybuilding training program. It was a split routine, back, buys, chest, shoulders, tries, legs, sort of the traditional split. And the cool thing about that is both groups, the higher protein one and the control group, gained about the same lean mass. However, and this is a kicker, the group that ate more protein actually lost fat mass, which again, that confused a lot of people. It's like, okay, they seem to gain the same amount of lean mass at about 2.2 grams per kilo or 1 gram per pound, but they seem to lose more fat mass as you elevate protein intake. And again, as you know, it's probably related to some thermic effect. Maybe it increases NEAT or NEAT. I mean, who knows? All I know is I'm interested in clinical endpoints. Does it do X, Y, and Z? I mean, mechanistically, those are interesting questions, but I'm more interested in what ultimately happens. What pragmatic advice can you give? So yeah, that was the genesis of those high protein diet studies.
And so can we absorb more protein after we strength train, or is that just a bit of a myth? Like it doesn't really matter necessarily when you get your protein throughout the day? I
don't think, in general, I don't think it matters, meaning does the timing matter? However, it's kind of weird. It's it's two sides of the same coin. It's like, okay, well, we know total protein intake matters. We know timing doesn't seem to matter. However, we are temporal creatures. We get up, we go to sleep. So you're still spacing protein out throughout the day. So in a sense, you're making timing matter, right? Because we're not going to eat a 200 a gram bolus of protein for breakfast and then skip the rest of your meals. You're going to probably spread out that 200 grams, maybe about 50 in lunch, 50 breakfast, 50 lunch. Maybe you'll have a snack and then you'll get almost 100 grams for dinner. We still space it out. So when people say timing doesn't matter, technically it doesn't matter in the sense that does it matter if you do a pre or post-workout protein meal? No, but the pre and post-workout protein meal represents an opportunity to feed, and that's why it matters. So, timing still matters because it helps you spread the protein dose throughout the day.
Same thing with intermittent fasting. I have done that in the past, but I don't do it now just because I want to get that, extra 45 grams of protein or so that I get in the morning. And so, I don't want to miss out on that window, so to speak, And then I also have eggs a little bit later on as well, which probably gets me to about another 30 grams. So there's, 75 grams of protein that I wouldn't have gotten, had I done the intermittent fasting. So appreciate you answering the question on that one. And then in terms of, hypertrophy and gaining muscle, do you think then that you would gain more muscle if you added, say, 1.5 grams of protein to your diet versus 1.0 grams of protein per pound a day?
To me, that's really a pragmatic question rather than, I know a lot of scientists will answer it as what I call them science purists versus I'm more of a pragmatist. They will answer that this way. Well, there's no evidence that 1.5 is necessarily better than 1.0 grams per pound. And you know what? I would say, yeah, you're right. But then I would sort of flip the question. Well, what's the downside of going up to 1.5? Is there a downside? And the answer to that is no. So why wouldn't you go up to 1.5? Maybe you're one of those individuals in the minority where it actually helps you gain lean mass. So to me, I think I find it somewhat annoying that there are scientists and clinicians that are purists in the sense that, I think unless you show me 10 more studies showing this, I'm not going to tell my client or my athlete to do this. Whereas I look at it and say, you know what? This either helps you or has a neutral effect. So I think you should try it. And so that's how I view the 1.5 versus 1. To me, if you could do 1.5, do 1.5. Just as an aside, my wife is a competitive cyclist. I think she's world class, to be honest. And she's at 3.0 grams per kilo. So you're like, wow, a cyclist at 3.0 grams per kilo? Now, why would that be? Well, she's not trying to gain muscle, for one thing, but we know it helps you recover. And if it helps you recover, you can train harder. So, 1.5 grams per kilo, maybe it doesn't directly increase skeletal muscle mass.
Per
However,
pound.
right.
Yeah.
But what if it helps you recover? And if it helps you recover, maybe you train harder. And by training harder, you might gain more lean mass.
Okay. That's a good answer to that question. What about in terms of like growth hormone and testosterone? Like if people are taking these things, say at like, I'm not talking about like bodybuilding doses, although that would be interesting to know just because I'd be interested in that. But, there's a lot of people now who are taking peptides who won't necessarily increase your growth hormone, like, beyond say like a super physiological level, but they'll get it as high as possible. And then, bodybuilding doses of testosterone, again, generally speaking, are like way, way, way beyond, super physiological levels. But a lot of people now are taking TRT, at levels of like, more than 100 a week. So maybe between 100 and 200. And that, generally speaking, not all the time, will, put you into a super physiological range. So if you are someone who's taking those things, like, are you more likely to get more benefit from the protein?
Well, should actually ask two questions. One related to GH and peptides that are basically GH secretagogues, and then testosterone.
Sure.
Let me address testosterone. So I guess when you say super physiologic, are you saying at the high end of normal, whatever that is? So let's say the high end's 1,200 nanograms per deciliter. Is that what we're talking?
Yeah, maybe that end, maybe just a little bit above, because I know TRT is sort of, again, like some people are taking 200 a week, which is definitely going to put you into a super physiological range. And so I think there's more people now than ever who are probably in that kind of range. So maybe walk us then through, the very high end of normal and then just a little bit above normal.
And in terms of the effects on skeletal muscle mass or lean mass?
In terms of if you have that much more testosterone, are you going to absorb protein better? Is it going to lead to more muscle mass, not directly related, say, to the testosterone itself, like just related to the protein?
I can only speculate on that because there's no hard data on that. Getting someone on TRT and also, increasing protein intake. Although there's real world data. I mean, I talk to guys, and mostly guys, I was about to say guys and girls, but guys who do that. Now, to me, testosterone is probably the second best performance enhancing drug there is. As an aside, I think EPO is number one, testosterone's number two. Testosterone typically is viewed as a PED, but really it's a training drug. It helps you train harder. Now, would it make sense that if you're on TRT and let's say it bumps your levels between 1,200 and let's say 2,000 nanograms per deciliter, so you're above the typical physiological range. I'm not even sure who determined that, but let's play around with that range. I would speculate that added protein, because increasing your protein intake is going to have to help you put on skeletal muscle mass, particularly when you have, testosterone coursing through your veins, because it's just what I see. And I'm not going to wait for someone to do a randomized controlled trial to tell me that. It's just, I see it. And maybe it's not a trial that'll ever happen. So let's assume it never happens because IRBs think it might be unethical. Okay, it never happens. So you're left to just observe people who do it. The peptides and or GH, I've never really been a big fan of the peptides. I mean, the data is scant, but I tell people, try it, see if it helps you, because you're not going to get an RCT on it, not anytime soon. Have a physician monitor you just to see if there's any adverse effects, health-wise. And same with GH. I mean, I've had friends who are on GH and they use it mainly to lose body fat. One that was on it really for quite a long time, and I swear to God, his elbows were growing. I mean, he had big elbows. So, I'm not a fan of big elbows, and he may have had a slightly larger forehead, but I still think the two best performance-enhancing substances are EPO and testosterone. GH and the peptides, I'd try it, see if it works, have your physician monitor it and see what happens.
Okay. One last question on protein before I move on to creatine. Do you ever get athletes or anyone to take casein protein before bed later in the day just because it is slower digesting? Or again, is that sort of like getting into the super minutia of things overall?
Yeah, the quick answer to that is no. I mean, if someone asks, I suggest it, but typically before they're going to bed, they've already hit their protein goals. So that's usually not an issue. And a lot of people don't even like casein. So that's the other issue.
Yeah, it is kind of, difficult to mix up. If you are going to use it, you can almost basically have to like eat it like a pudding. You can't really drink it.
Right.
All right. So let's get into creatine because I know that's, been all over social media recently. And like I was mentioning before the show or maybe at the start, a lot of it has actually been focused on brain function recently, which is very interesting. But, a lot of people just want to know, like, how many grams of creatine do you recommend per day? And does that change based upon your overall goals?
Yeah, that is a great question because I've been recommending 5 grams a day, God, for the past 2 decades. Now, people ask me, well, how much do you take? And so I've been taking creatine since Bill Clinton was president. So we're going back to the 1990s. So when it first came out. And I take, what's the brand name? I forget the brand name, but it's capsules. So it's 3 capsules a day, and it's like ends up being like 3.2 grams a day. But I've been doing it for 3 decades. So there's no data on 3 grams a day for 3 decades. I know that. The short-term data shows 5 grams a day will improve, skeletal muscle lean mass and obviously strength assessments of strength and power and also endurance. Data coming out, and a lot of this comes from my good friend Darren Candow. He lives in British Columbia. He's at the University of Regina in Saskatchewan.
Fellow Canuck.
He's published more on creatine than anybody. And he's a big fan of you got to get, if you want to help central nervous system, the brain, you got to get 10 grams a day. And he's actually one of the few scientists who's bumped his dosing up. Everyone else I know is like, I take my teaspoon 5 grams a day. That should be enough. And I feel that if I've been doing 3 grams a day for 3 decades, that should be enough. That's different than taking 10 grams a day for, 3 months or 6 months. But he does think that 10 grams a day is needed to get enough creatine into the brain. And that could be true. I mean, I always tell people this. Is there a downside to going up to 10 grams? The answer is no. If you could do 10 grams, do it. If you can comply with it, do it. But if you can't comply, don't start. If you're going to do 10 grams and then a month later, like, I'm going to go back to 3 grams or 5 grams, well, then why even start? So the data on creatine now is so interesting that even amongst the sports science field, we don't need to see another study showing it enhances performance. Just like we've seen that. We don't need another one of those. The studies on central nervous system, that's what's super cool. And also, some of the clinical conditions are kind of interesting. Now, myself and one of my colleagues, Tony Ricci, he does some work with mixed martial arts fighters, and Corey Peacock as well. We are going to do, and this is the first time I've been excited about a different creatine study. This is what we're going to do. And Mike, I want your thoughts on this. The muscles of the eye, the extraocular muscles are skeletal muscles. And sort of people ignore it. It's innervated by the third nerve, and then you have LR6SO4. You memorize that in medical school, and it's going to come back to haunt you, right? So superior oblique is the 4th cranial nerve, and the lateral rectus is the 6th one. So I'm like, okay, it's eye. Why don't we see the effects of creatine on the way your eye can track a fast-moving object? And you're like, well, why the hell does that matter? Well, baseball coming at 100 miles an hour, that's fast-moving. But our initial study
punches coming at your face.
Right. We're going to look at fighters versus non-fighters to see if they're better at tracking objects, which I'm guessing they are. And then we're going to see, what if we supplement people with creatine who have not taken it? Does your eye become better at tracking an object because now you have more creatine intramuscularly? Now, I don't know a single person who's going to take a biopsy of your lateral rectus to see if there's more creatine in your muscle. I mean, imagine you're sticking a needle in your eye. Okay, we're just going to take a little piece. It's like, no, you're not taking a little piece. So that to me is going to be super cool, where we're kind of marrying skeletal muscle physiology with neuroscience, because at the end of the day, I mean, your eye basically is connected to your brain. And so if you could convince a baseball player, and they're like, who needs creatine? It's a high skill game. I got to be able to hit a ball. I'm like, but if you could convince them that a ball coming at you, moving weirdly at 90 to 95 miles an hour, you track it better, they're going to be like, hey, I'm going to take this stuff. It's legal. So that's one of the things I'm excited about. We're going to do that project either the end of this year or sometime next year. And this will be one of the few different, quote, performance studies on creatine.
That's very cool. Well, I'm happy that you guys are doing that study. I'm looking forward to the results, and I'm sure that there's a lot of athletes, like I said, particularly MMA fighters, and I know that you're, really in that community, are probably really going to be interested in that. Although I imagine that most of those guys are probably taking it anyway. In terms
Yeah.
of,
Well, actually, no. Mike, let me stop you. Actually, a lot of them are not. Here's why: because they don't want to go up to an away class. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So they take they love beta-alanine because it helps them train harder. But unless they're light heavy or heavy, a lot of them will avoid it. Or here's what they'll do: they'll take it, and then maybe a few weeks before the fight, they go off it. So yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I didn't think of that, but as soon as you said it, I was like, okay, I know you work with fighters and they need to make weight, and weight cutting's a whole other thing, but we'll get into that maybe another day. But in terms of absorbing creatine, like if you are going to take 10 grams a day, should you break up your dose into like 2 doses or 3 doses? And are there any nutrients that you should be taking along with it to increase the absorption?
The initial studies were actually creatine mixed with warm water. So I don't think it matters if you break it up or just do a 10-gram bolus. Would it help if you combine it with sugar? Yeah. Does it matter in the long run? I don't think so.
Okay. So no need. I remember back in the day, it was like grapefruit juice. I remember I'm sure you remember that back in the day. That was kind of.
Oh yeah. You got to have it with a lot of sugar. I remember Muscle Tech had this product that had like a shitload of carbs in it. I was like, holy geez, this is like pure sugar.
Cell Tech or something like that, I think it was called. Yeah. In terms of the study that came out maybe a few months ago, it got a lot of play on social media. If you're sleep deprived, you can take 0.35 kilograms per gram of creatine per day in order to help with the effects of sleep deprivation. Like, is that something that is only going to be helpful in people who are already not taking creatine? Like, if you're already taking creatine, like, do you need that bolus in the day, or basically are your stores going to be already saturated?
Yeah, I think that is going to help those who are primarily not on creatine. So, but here's the thing, when I read these studies, I'm like, hey, that's kind of interesting. And then I'm thinking, well, people who don't take creatine aren't going to suddenly take it because they're sleep deprived. They're just not. I mean, it's not a behavior they'll engage in. I mean, from sort of a mechanistic standpoint, it's interesting. It's like, wow, it helps you if your brain's kind of messed up. But we kind of know that. But again, it's, pragmatically, it's not something you're going to see in people who don't typically supplement.
Okay. And in terms of, I know you've done videos before on creatine and concussions. Are there any updates? Like, do you recommend people taking creatine like continuously if you are in a combat sport? And would you increase your dose, say, after you sustained a concussion?
Yeah, pragmatically, I would say anyone in a contact sport. So that's boxing, mixed martial arts, wrestling. I'd even put soccer there because it's literally the only sport where you use your head to purposely hit an object, which you don't even do that in fighting. It's like, don't use your head, don't use your head. So yeah, those sports, one, they should all be taking creatine regularly. But if they do suffer a concussion, I think it's a good idea to up that dose. You're not, again, think of this. Is there a trade-off? Is there potential harm to upping the dose? The answer is no. So if it potentially might help, I think you should do it.
Okay. And in terms of other supplements besides creatine, I know that you're a big fan of beta-alanine. Like, what are the best supplements that someone should take, particularly for strength training or anaerobic sports? And would they be different, say, for endurance or aerobic sports?
Well, that's a good question. I think there's actually quite a bit of overlap between strength power sports and endurance sports. And the caveat I'll use for endurance sports, it's endurance sports that don't include running. To me, distance running sort of its own category. But if you look at endurance sports like canoeing, kayaking, rowing, where your body weight is supported, but you have to produce what I call it. I call them power endurance sports because you're doing a lot of repetitions, but you got to produce a lot of power. And rowing would be sort of the quintessential one. So if you take strength power sports and the power endurance sports, I mean, supplements in addition, the creatine, I'd say beta-alanine, sodium bicarbonate, the nitrates, taking nitrates, let's say before a race. Caffeine. I mean, people sort of overlook caffeine, but caffeine's one of the greatest ergogenic aids. And really another one that's kind of overlooked is sugar. In fact, I tell endurance athletes, I do a lot of stand-up paddling here, and there's a community here that races stand-up paddling and outrigger canoe racing. I tell them, get a Coca-Cola with sugar, not Diet Coke, and drink it 10 to 15 minutes before a race. The sugar will help you. The caffeine will help you. And a lot of people are like, Coca-Cola? I'm like, yeah, I mean, forget the name Coca-Cola. Just imagine you're consuming liquid, so you need the liquid. It's hot as hell in Florida. But you're getting sugar and caffeine, two of the best ergogenic aids. Now, I also tell them, take beta-alanine, sodium bicarbonate, nitrates, but it's very difficult to convince people to take these and comply with it and stick to sort of a supplement regimen. Only the very, very serious athletes that I've worked with will stick with that. So I tend to give people, what's the simplest advice? Okay, have Coke before a race. After the race, have a protein shake. Everyone should be able to do that. Although not everyone can do it. It's simple, but it's like, people are like, I'd rather have a beer after a race. I'm like, okay, have a beer. That's cool too. I have beer too every now and then. The one drop of alcohol would kill you. Come on, give me a break.
I agree. And in terms of the beta-alanine, I think, it was from you, I actually learned that it's not something like a lot of people just take beta-alanine before they work out. Whereas like it should be something that should be taken several times like throughout the day. Like it's just like creatine in terms of like, you have to build up these stores. Yeah. It's not like taking something like caffeine where you take it right before the race and it gives you a boost.
Yeah, well, in fact, you bring up an interesting point because most, quote, pre-workout supplements aren't necessarily pre-workout because they have beta-alanine, they have creatine. Caffeine definitely is pre-workout. Sugar is definitely pre-workout. Nitrates are, but a lot of the ingredients in there aren't necessarily pre-workout supplements. And you mentioned beta-alanine. You should be taking that regularly, somewhere between 4 and 6 grams a day over the course of weeks. And I usually tell people, wait 4 to 6 weeks before you get a noticeable effect. But it's not technically you take it before you train and then you train harder. It doesn't work that way. I mean, caffeine does, nitrates do, but not beta-alanine.
So in terms of nitrates or, beetroot extract, I think that's kind of what you're getting at and what most people are familiar with. How many milligrams before? Is it around 2,000 milligrams or 5,000? Like what's going to give you the best overall boost in performance?
Yeah, I've had paddlers, because I work with a lot of stand-up paddlers, play around with that dose somewhere in that range. Some say they get quite a noticeable effect. Others say because they're mixing it with caffeine, they're not sure, is it the caffeine or is it the nitrates? So, and that's fine. I'd say take everything that might help you. But this is the problem I have with nitrates because I've tried them is I just don't like the taste. I just can't handle it, just bad. I'm like, I know people do this and they just chug it like the beetroot juice. I'm like, I can't do this. I just can't.
What about capsules?
Yeah, I don't like taking capsules before a race though. Okay. I have, I'll drink Coca-Cola actually before a race. So that seems to work with me.
And say if you, for whatever reason, you don't want to drink Coca-Cola, and like, I'm right with you. I mean, the research on having, carbohydrates before performance is, undisputable. Like it definitely improves performance. Would it be okay if someone say wanted to have like a slice of like sourdough bread or something that's like slower digesting, or does it have to be something quick acting like sugar, like liquid sugar? Like would one be better than the other?
I think it depends on the length of the race. So if you're doing a 30 minutes or shorter race, I'd say you want something fast acting. You want it in you because you're not racing that long. If you're racing for 60 to 90 minutes or even 2 hours, I think bread is fine. Now, I always forewarn people, make sure you practice this in training. A lot of people make the mistake of, I'm about to race. Hey, I haven't tried this before. Let's try it. I'm like, no, you don't try new stuff before a race. You have to try it in practice. So as long as you train using whatever bread So some people use potatoes. I'm like, okay, well, I guess, yeah, eat potatoes while you train. I mean, to me, that's just weird. But if it works, I mean, it should work, but you're eating a damn potato. Try it in practice. Don't like try it like the day of a race.
And then in terms of caffeine, I know you put out a study recently on caffeine and L-theanine, and this, I think, has been studied mostly almost as like a nootropic, or people maybe who are trying to increase productivity or even maybe study for exams, that kind of thing. But you actually saw an improvement in performance with caffeine and L-theanine. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, what's interesting about caffeine alone and then caffeine with theanine is that the theanine is supposed to help you in terms of, for a lot of people, they say they don't get sort of the downside of coming off caffeine. Like they feel like they hit a low. And theanine
and less jittery, I think, too.
Yeah, and then less jittery. And so they say theanine seems to prevent that. Now, I've known people, again, I see what's done in a lab and I see what happens in the field, or sort of real world application. And for a lot of people, especially if you're racing, again, I deal mostly with people racing. So again, this is different than, let's say, bodybuilding or whatnot, is that if you take enough caffeine and you race, worrying about any sort of jitters from the caffeine is a non-issue, because first of all, you're busting your ass racing. So is it something that is going to work more for something that's not continuous? Let's say you're doing a rowing race or whatever. I think the caffeine alone, you're not going to get there's no downside to it. Whereas, let's say you're lifting weights where it's you do something, you rest. You do something, you rest. Would jitters be a bigger part there? Maybe. And I think people should just experiment with caffeine and then caffeine plus theanine and see what works best. Now, obviously, you can't blind it because you know what you're taking, but still, that sort of real world data is important.
A lot of people recently have been talking about mitochondrial health. There's a lot of new supplements on mitochondrial health. Like I had Dr. Casey Means on the show maybe around this time last year, I think, or maybe it was a little bit earlier. And she was talking about urolithin A. Are there any mitochondrial supplements that you recommend or think could be beneficial for athletes?
Well, the first thing I would ask is, how do you measure mitochondrial health? To be honest,
yeah, I know Chris Masterjohn has some kind of thing. I haven't looked into it, but yeah, I'm not sure of any like metrics, certainly like a blood test or any way at all as to how to measure mitochondrial health. Like, yeah, I agree with you on that one.
Yeah. So I wouldn't even know how to answer the question, because I've always asked myself, well, how is this even assessed? Now, I know one thing: if you do a lot of aerobic training, you produce a lot of mitochondria. If you don't do aerobic training, let's say all you do is weight training. Let's say it's Olympic weightlifting, so high load, low reps. You ain't producing mitochondria. So does that mean the weightlifter has poor mitochondrial health, but the distance runner has good mitochondrial health? To me, it's neither, because it's an adaptation to a specific demand. In this case, if you do repetitive work for minutes and hours, you make more mitochondria. If you do very high intensity efforts with a lot of rest, you don't need mitochondria. I mean, you need mitochondria, but not for that effort. So unless someone can show me how you measure mitochondrial health and have it translate into something that's clinically meaningful or athletically meaningful, I'm not even sure how to answer that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, something that we do need to at least evaluate some kind of, or develop a biomarker for, before we can really put it into practice and start, I guess, really recommending, supplements for people on that. I know that unfortunately, our time is up here or pretty close. So maybe you can just let people know where they can learn more about you, more about like your new studies that are coming out, your Twitter handle, anything else that you wanted to discuss.
Yeah, I do want to mention the International Society of Sports Nutrition Conference. Our next national conference is in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It's a beautiful beach, Mike. You should go. You'll like Fort Lauderdale Beach. It is June 17 to 19 at it's at the Westin Hotel, right on the beach. It's on A1A, so that's in June. Also, I'm easy to reach on X or Twitter. My handle is Jose Antonio PhD. I usually just post science stuff because, well, that's what I know. I know science stuff. And I also post any publications we have coming out of our research group. I always post it on X just because it seems to be the best avenue for getting sort of the word out there. But hey, Mike, it's been a pleasure being on the show. Time flies when we talk about this stuff because it's fun stuff.
It is really, really great chatting with you today. Thank you so much for coming on. I'd love to do it again sometime, but I know unfortunately you have to go. And so thank you so much again, everyone, for listening. And as always, I'll be back with another episode soon.